Hi, everyone. It's Audrey.
And David.
We're so happy and grateful that you're here listening to us. We really want to thank the people who follow us on Apple Podcasts and have written reviews. We appreciate you guys.
We hope to increase our reach within the international education community, so we are asking for your help. Please follow our show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, or your favorite podcast listening app. We have posted instructions on how to do this on our podcast page.
If you like our show and the services we aim to provide, please rate us and write a review. This will help us grow our audience and support our mission of sharing the joys of international teaching with as broad a group as possible. We'd love to increase those numbers in Africa, South America, and Australia.
So thanks again for listening and for all your support. Let's recruit as many teaching peeps as possible to travel,
teach,
and connect with us.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our year in review show as we wrap up season 2 at the Educators Going Global podcast. Woohoo!
Yay!
Our guiding question for this episode is, what are some key takeaways from all of our episodes this past year? And we grouped our shows into categories as a way to organize them. So, David, why don't you get us started with the first category?
All righty. So our listeners know that one of our biggest themes is recruiting, and we like to add transitioning in there as well. So let's jump right into a few of the episodes that fit into this category. So episode number 41 with Greg Moncada was a little different on the recruiting because it was head of school recruiting. I really appreciated his depth of insight, and he really offered some recruiting strategies that were very helpful and interesting, just as a bystander, always wondering how heads of school get hired. So this episode really helps international educators appreciate your school leaders. That's my thinking. It also can be used as a guidebook for aspiring school leaders. And you'll just find Greg, he's been on the show a couple times, just so helpful and has so much wisdom.
I would say also that a lot of his tips would be good for just anybody applying for a regular teaching position or any position in an international school, the way he talked about really do your research in depth, that's a theme that we have brought up time and again, do your research. And the way he talked about act as though you are already at the school and just imagine and be ready to kind of talk about their core values and so on. So really good tips for anybody.
Excellent point. Well, speaking of really doing that research, and just like you said, kind of putting yourself in the position of what would it be like at this school versus another school, we put together a profiling document and a spreadsheet. We've mentioned it a few times on the show that gives you criteria for analyzing potential schools, cities, and countries as you prepare for and go through the recruiting process. So you can find both those documents in our blog.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say, for example, we taught in Jamaica, and Kingston isn't really a great beach town. And I talked to several people who had taken the job there thinking, oh, yeah, Jamaica, we can go to the beach.
Oh,
Well, kind of. You have to drive quite a ways out of Kingston to get to a good beach. So just to exemplify the depth of research that could really be helpful.
exactly. Our show 45 with Valeria Leitonen was about consulting, and we're fortunate to have a couple coaches that folks can go to our website and find their information on. And she brought in the added bonus of giving a glimpse of the diplomatic world. That was, to me, just very interesting as a guy who lived near Washington, D.C., and our neighbors were from the State Department. So she shares, of course, several tips and strategies that she offers clients as they recruit. And then, like I was just saying, her insights into how it kind of works with the diplomatic world and networking was really helpful. Her husband is an employee of the U.S. State Department.
One thing that I would add to that is you may or may not know if you're new to this world that we often have friends and colleagues and have lots of people in the community who are from the diplomatic world. And so, like David said, it was really fun to get a little bit of an insider look at that world.
Our next person dealing with recruiting was episode 46 with Pauline O'Brien. And right off the bat, probably most of our listeners have had some contact with her, as she is the Global Recruitment Business Strategy Development Director. Boy, that's a title for ISS, International School Services. She offered a lot of guidance, especially through their recruiting fairs. And the episode also got into the various trends that she's picking up on in her consultation work around the world, including recruiting.
Yeah, and it was wonderful to talk to her. She doesn't pull any punches, and she came in as a business person and looked at this whole world of international school recruiting and said, "What is going on here?" from a different perspective. And the fresh eyes, I think really her input had a lot of impact on how the international school recruiting fairs are run, particularly, where she looked at, what do you mean candidates go into the director's hotel room? That just seems very unsafe and uncomfortable. So I think that she has made a big difference.
Definitely. And that's another takeaway as we've gone through 2 seasons. It does seem like, not in a negative way, but a very bright light is shining on international schools. Many of them have been able to get by for years on their reputations, but now more than ever, with several different trends and themes, they're having to confront some things that need to change. And so we need more people that are going to come in and question and get people to take different perspectives for sure. All right, so episode 47 was with Jacqueline Millay, and this was her 4th time on the podcast. We love having her come on because she already had so much experience as an international educator, but through her work in helping people get jobs, she just keeps learning and bringing in more knowledge. I would definitely go to her website to find more information as you start your recruiting process. And like with my son Maxwell, she really brings in so much help in the recruiting process.
Yeah, and as people have said, boy, I sure wish there had been someone around like her or like Valeria when I was doing my recruiting back in the day.
Exactly. Well, here's a good connection. So she partners with Greg Lemoyne as part of the team that do the International Teacher Podcast. And they're pretty much parallel to what we do. And so check them out, whether you're recruiting or you're a veteran, you just want the latest on what's happening internationally. Keep that in mind. So, speaking of Greg, we had him on show 62, in which he went through his second book. He's written 2 books on international living and teaching, and this book is entitled International Teaching, The Best Kept Secret in Education. And it's always fun. This second time we've had Greg on, he's so warm and he's funny. He's got a great personality. And listeners can hear several of his strategies for recruiting, which are really based on face to face interactions, especially around recruiting fairs.
Yeah, and in this book, he also touched on a lot of the other aspects that we've also touched on in terms of what are the advantages of teaching internationally and what to expect when you take a job in an international school, what to look for, what to avoid, and so on. So it was a really helpful all around kind of a guide.
Yes, just so much wisdom he had to share. Very practical. Well, speaking of practical and experience, in show 64, I had the opportunity to interview Audrey and Mark Forgeron
Who?
about, yay, you might have heard of those 2 people, about transitioning and self onboarding. And I have to smile that I was kind of pushing this one with you, Audrey, trying to get you 2 to come on. And you were just going, I'm not sure what we have to share. And then I was going, man, you 2 have been doing this for 30 years. You have such analytical minds. You've made several transitions. And I thought it was just a fabulous show with tons of insights, lots of wisdom. And in this case, we spent a little time talking about your retirements, that you were both back in the US and you said, we're going to go back overseas. In this case, Mark working, and you found yourselves in Nepal. So I think that was an excellent episode. What do you think now that you've shared via that show, Audrey?
I guess I had a little bit more to share than I had imagined. And I also want to say that I can't wait to interview you, partner, because you have had a lot of experience as well with your 10 plus schools that you taught at. So, yeah,
Yes.
everybody, something to look forward to.
When you're asked to leave a lot of countries, you do get a lot of countries under your belt. Just kidding. I always left on my own accord. All right. So, episode 67, one of our more recent ones, was with Max Carpenter, my son. And this one really paints the picture of what a first timer to international education can experience. And Max, we took him through, Max, what were your experiences with recruiting, onboarding, orientation, and then the first couple months of his teaching experience in his new country, his new city. I think even veterans would have fun just hearing what it's like to be in your 20s. And for those old timers like me, to try to remember their first conference or their first trying to go overseas, what it was like. So Max paints a pretty clear picture.
Yeah, that was fun. And, I loved when he said how much he appreciated that some of the veteran teachers said to him, "Oh, you really should go on this field trip. You'll really enjoy it." And I'm thinking to myself, okay, is part of their motivation that they don't want to go and they want to get the young guy to do it? Because I know that that happens as well. But the fact that he did truly enjoy it and got a lot out of it is fabulous. It just reminds me what it's like to be, like you said, young and full of energy. And yes, I can do it. I can take on anything. He's got all those different preps and he's like, yes, no problem. Oh, I remember having that energy.
Oh my. All right, Artie, why don't you take us to our next category?
Our next category is, may I have the envelope, please? International teacher experiences and lessons learned. So, in our first of these two episodes in this category was episode 54. We had, you may remember, our former newbies, Jessica, Mel and Cole, and Tanya. And we were getting updates from them on how things were going. So we heard some high points and some low points. They told us about their next steps and gave some tips and strategies. And what I found quite interesting about it, besides the fact that they had some really helpful insights and strategies to share, was how much crossover there was. They kept saying, "Yeah, that's what I was going to say." So that was really a fun episode to catch up with them and find out where they're at.
It's one thing to talk to someone during their first year, like we did with Max, but for all of these teachers, it was after their first year. Mel and Cole, I think they'd already put in a couple years. So they really had some time to reflect and think about that whole first year. So I think there are a lot of takeaways, as Audrey is saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of a lot of takeaways, oh my goodness, did we ever have a group of experts on? We had the experienced group of Rob, Dave, and Amy, who were all veteran international educators with several years under each of their belts and multiple schools and countries. And again, we shared with them highlights and lowlights of their careers, tips and strategies, and a big one was getting out of the bubble. And so we talked a fair bit about that. What can you do to consider yourself as a traveler and ambassador of your country with an open mind and wanting to see what other experiences are out there? And if you listen to that show, you will find all their different incredible experiences getting outside the bubble. They also all raised kids overseas and they had some tips and strategies to share there. And then they talked about their various pathways that some of them kind of unfolded organically and others were more intentional, but just so interesting to hear all their experiences, right, Dave?
Right. And that reminds me of a friend of mine who is going to take a year off next year and just take a break from international education. And that's one of the things that David Ross shared about. So there are a lot of great ideas that these educators share with us. And we're going to have them on again. And I'm hoping this is going to be a reoccurring thing that we get to work with this panel. And that was episode 66, by the way, if you wanted to go back and find it by the number. But yeah, I'm psyched we're going to be recording with them next month. All right, so another theme was diversity, equity, and inclusion. And right now, I'm in the US and reading, like I always do, about politics and culture and just what's happening. And probably as many of you know, the DEI movement is experiencing lots of pushback in the US. It's been happening for maybe the last year, year and a half, but right now, sadly, it's going to go into high gear. That makes me really sad because I think the real opportunities with it and the people we've interacted with on the show are such great teachers. And they really help you with introspection and they help you see perspectives in no way in a heavy handed way. So it does seem to me from talking to these guests that DEI, DEIJ, belonging are themes that have momentum in international schools, and especially with these two educators, Ken Shelton and Kevin Simpson. So, episode 49 with Ken Shelton, the topics were DEI and AI. Talk about very different topics, but Ken has a background in instructional technology as well, and we wanted to hit on that a little bit. So, the overarching theme was program development and change management, which has come up a lot in our show. So if you are someone looking at your school, developing new programs, maybe having struggles, this is a good show because it's a how-to show to really follow through and take those ideas and plans, implement them, measure how you're doing, and then continue them that they just don't fade.
Yeah, he struck me as such an intelligent guy. He just had so much helpful information to share. He's authored a couple of books. He's been involved in so many different movements and programs that promote DEI as well as AI. And yet he was so thoughtful, kind, and charismatic. He just was kind of the full package. So I had so much admiration for him. We would love to have him back on. And I think we might have got a commitment from him at the end of his show.
I think we did. In the similar vein, episode 55 with Kevin Simpson, just this dynamic, energetic educator. These people are out offering professional development and helping people think about how they can improve their practices and make their schools and their communities more inclusive. So, Kevin also covered new programming and change management. He outlined the AIELOC, which is AIELOC. That's the acronym for his organization that really gets its juice from networking, that just educators around the world are a part of this organization. And then they, in turn, offer schools support with DEI, and they also offer support with personal growth of school members and community members. So I was very impressed with Kevin.
Yeah, I was too. And the whole thing just started with a couple people on Facebook making a group and saying, we're just so frustrated that people of color have such a hard time becoming leaders, even in the international school community. And so they just wanted to support each other. And it has just mushroomed and grown. And it seems that almost any initiative that comes along, they embrace. Like Kevin is just, he's got his fingers in so many pies, I couldn't even keep up, and it's a wonderful, wonderful community. And I follow them on LinkedIn, and they're just always posting about the new opportunities that are happening. And I mean, I just got to hand it to them. They're such busy and involved people, but yet they just keep such a positive outlook on it all the time. So, on a similar vein, I'm going to talk now about the theme of belonging. And oh my goodness, the first show I want to talk about is a show with Douglas Beam, and he works at GOA, the Global Online Academy. And I have to tell you, I just felt such a beautiful vibe from Douglas. He is a kind and thoughtful person. We talked about the definition of belonging and factors that nurture it and ways that students describe their sense of belonging and identity as an international student, which differs from what it might be in your home country. There are positive and negative forces affecting international students as they develop their identities. And school leaders can implement programs and strategies to improve the environments inside the classroom and outside the classroom to support student well being in terms of how they feel, if they feel supported and connected to others. And he helped us draw a distinction between inclusion and belonging. Because you can be included, let's imagine at a cafeteria lunch table, you can be included where people say, okay, sit here. You can also still feel like an outsider. And so helping people feel like they belong is so, so key to their ability to flourish and succeed in any kind of school environment.
Douglas, as you were saying, is such a warm and thoughtful person. And back to kind of the diversity, equity, and inclusion. With a light touch, he offered a pathway forward for building mutual understanding and how we can make our communities, as you were saying, more inclusive. Just a wonderful, thoughtful human being. And I really enjoyed that episode.
Yeah, and speaking of warm, thoughtful human beings, boy, Alain Peltier in episode 57, talking about bullying and what a heart that guy had. And he talked about how he uses a role play in a skit format and he, gets on stage to help his audience members connect with what he's saying emotionally because people don't always understand what bullying looks like and feels like and how it progresses. So he takes them through kind of the whole story arc of the bullying experience, the fact that victimization is really a complex concept and people may not even recognize it in themselves. Talked about when and where bullying happens and differentiating the bully from the behavior. The behavior is not acceptable, it doesn't necessarily define the person. So those are some things to keep in mind. Looking for signs that a student is being bullied, and then support strategies that he offered for victims, but also for the bullies, because often they are hurting as well, and that's why they instigate this behavior. Then we ended with talking about social networking and bullying and how much of an issue that has been. And I know that, David, you've looked at Jonathan Haidt's work, and it's really, really important that we look at these things because often the adults in the room are not paying attention to the social networking and what's going on there.
So that's exactly what I was going to say about Jonathan Haidt's work and others. And this was one of those shows, again, fitting with the DEI and in this case, belonging, that crosses all areas of education, whether you're international school, a private school, a public school. And this is a theme that we will consistently come back to.
Yeah, and he was talking about Canada, man. Canadians are
Yay!
supposed to be so nice, but bullying happens everywhere.
It does, sadly.
Yeah, so talking about belonging and DEI and combining the two, in episode 59, we talked to the wonderful Dr. Derek Gay, and he epitomizes the whole idea of considering other people's position and situation and experience. And he's one of the most empathetic people that we've talked to. He talked about current trends in international schools in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And he suggested that sometimes we need to really understand what these terms mean, because how can we proceed if we don't know exactly what we're looking at and how they manifest themselves in schools? He talked about approaches to use in order to encourage buy-in and minimize pushback within school communities when you're introducing these kind of programs. And that dovetailed nicely with the kind of strategies that Ken and Kevin had introduced to us. He talked about action steps that schools can take around the interconnection between dignity, respect, inclusion, and belonging, including restorative justice practices. Because when things happen, ideally, you highlight for someone that something has happened that hurt someone else, and then you give them an opportunity to rectify the situation. Because if you just leave them with the punishment or the guilt feelings, that isn't really addressing the deep part of the problem. He talked about building a culture of belonging in international schools, which tend to have higher student and staff turnover. So it is a little tougher to build that sense of belonging, that culture of belonging. And then he shared some thoughts about how schools of education that are training new teachers can offer diversity, inclusion, and belonging opportunities for their teacher trainees.
And he was in New York during our interview. He'd just been teaching right there a course that he's involved with. And I can share, if Dr. Gay listens to this, just the praise of the last school I worked at. He was there in the fall, and I was connected to a couple of people that just said, wow, what an incredible experience. We want him to come back. So just as I was saying earlier, it does seem that DEI and belonging are movements that hopefully will continue to grow internationally. All right, moving to our next topic, dealing with technology. In episode 42, we had the big dogs, John Mickton and Dan Taylor, who are also podcasters with their very popular International Schools podcast. We had them on, and as Audrey and I were instructional technologists earlier in our careers, it was great to talk to these two really world leaders. They're people who I've followed for quite some time. We talked to them basically about the current state of technology use. Where are we after COVID and the school lockdowns and virtual schools? And we also got into some trends going forward with international schools. So that was a very helpful episode for folks, maybe especially newbies, wondering what might the technology situation be once I go overseas. And that's hard to generalize, but there definitely are trends.
Yeah, and their podcast is about technology, but it's also about so much more in international schools. So I would 100% recommend people follow their podcast. Also, I follow them on LinkedIn, and John consistently posts outstanding resources for teachers. Recently, a lot of it's been about the use of AI, which is a really hot topic in all schools, but also international schools. And I would definitely follow him if you are interested in seeing more research on that.
Exactly. Back to that word humanistic. His resources, many of them are just about the very human aspect of education and where technology is involved. So definitely, if he's not on your LinkedIn list, follow him. All right. So episode 53 was with Chris Smith, and it was covering the topic of data. And yeah, so Audrey had a little bit of a reaction. Chris took it very well. And he showed us how we really can use data in a very constructive way, and we shouldn't be scared about it. And it should be something that, boy, we've heard for so many years. We make data driven decisions. And I often wondered about that, on how the data was brought in, how it was made into a way that you could see it. And that was a big part of what Chris talked about, and understand it to then guide you, not just in making decisions about your instruction, but really about all aspects of international schools. And that was a huge takeaway when he started talking about the finance office and other aspects of the school, not just the instructional side, where you can use data to do a better job for your school and at your school.
And I really appreciated the way Chris helped me to look at data as just information gathering. So anything that you find out, for example, how was the field trip, guys? And did you enjoy this lesson? And those surveys that we often do as teachers, what would be a good thing to continue doing? What are some things you'd like me to stop doing? What are some things you might like me to start doing? That's data right there. And then the whole idea of data visualization, which Chris is very, very high on, really made sense to me as well. You know, if you can, I think it's such an art to be able to depict data results in a visual way. So a lot of kind of infographics, I think, do that in a nice way that people, even like me, can understand. And you can make graphs that will make things more understandable even for your non-math people. And Chris really helped to, again, humanize the data.
Yes. In episode 58, we were fortunate to have Michael Nachbar, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Global Online Academy, probably better known as GOA. So, in this show, we really took a deep dive into online learning and the approach that GOA takes to support international schools and students. And we often think of online learning in terms of technology, components, laptops, all these different things. But boy, it was not the situation that Michael described at GOA. It's very much about building community, working with students to see what drives them, what are their interests, finding ways to bring in project-based learning, inquiry learning. And I mean, when he was talking about that, which is something I was involved in a long time ago, to do it in an online school, I was just blown away. So that was so impressive. And at the end, Audrey came out first to say, "Hey, how can I sign up? I want to teach at your school." And I was right behind her. So very interesting and insightful show about online learning, but a lot more.
Yeah, just another really humanistic and visionary and just smart and thoughtful guy. I really admire their program. It sounds incredible. And one thing you were talking about with humanizing, And this ties in with Chris and the data concept. At GOA, they're able to stay on top of kids' kind of mental state by looking at their data in terms of who's showing up or not, and whether they're turning in their work or not, whether they're participating in the online discussions or not. And they very quickly can track down students who might be struggling. And I think that just absolutely represents their humanism. And it was wonderful to hear about that. Our next topic is around leadership. And first, we'd like to highlight episode 43 with Michael Adams of the Tri Association, which is in Mexico and South America. And boy, howdy, as David would say, these guys really exemplify the warmth and family values of that region of the world. The role and mission of the Tri Association is really all about supporting all their schools and looking at all their initiatives and activities was incredible. Michael is one of these great connectors, and he's always looking at what can we do to help all our schools? What kind of PD can we offer in the region? And he talked a lot about the cultures of these schools and how they're different, and you just need to embrace, for example, that the kids in these classes are very chatty. And then how can you use that to your advantage in planning your lessons and things? He talked a lot about the positives of the region and why he moved down there intending to stay for a brief time and fell in love with it and has stayed for many, many years. And he also talked about some of the challenges.
So I just returned from a couple months in Mexico. It was my third trip in the last 4 years, I guess. And I'm in love with Mexico and the culture and the people and the art and everything. And it was neat to hear Michael exemplify that. And like you were giving the example with the students, and he talked about how supportive the parents were, and the community around these schools in general is just so strong. Because that's something in my travels in Mexico, and I speak a little bit of Spanish, connecting with people and just seeing the importance of family, faith, being connected, celebrating life. It's just a reminder, kind of this is something we've talked a lot about. When you start recruiting, I think some people get stuck on Europe or Asia maybe. And I say really look at Latin America in general. Just so many opportunities. I taught in Panama a ways back, and Michael was just a wonderful spokesperson for that part of the world.
Absolutely. Another fabulous leader that we were so fortunate to connect with and speak to is Laura Light. And in our second episode with her, we were lucky enough to catch up with her a second time. We asked her what keeps heads of school up at night. And she really had her finger on the pulse. She had just come back from actually a meeting with some of the heads, and she spoke about the themes of wellness around collective care and action. A lot of these heads have very stressful situations, stressful jobs, and her organization, AAIE, really seeks to help support the heads and, think of the leaders as people too. She talked about adaptive change and how that's affecting international schools. She talked about generative AI as well, of course, big topic with all the leaders that we've interviewed. She talked about professional learning and what the heads are looking at in terms of implementing the best professional learning that they can for their schools. She talked about regional organizations. And so we're talking about NISA, ASA, EARCOS, TRI, the organizations that kind of bring the schools together and do all the large workshops. She talked about DEI and how important a theme that is for all the heads. She talked about local concerns and also global concerns of school leaders. And finally, she talked about schools helping other schools during crisis situations. It was just wonderful to learn the extent to which the school leaders are people too and lean on each other and have these meetings where they get together and help each other through difficult times and also help each other to grow and seek to improve their schools and communities.
The collective brain power, wisdom, experiences of these heads of school being brought together through this organization just to me was so powerful. And just like you're saying, Audrey, it just makes me and you, I'm sure, appreciate these school leaders and what they do in their jobs. And as our world struggles with young people and social networking and technology and so much negativity and divisiveness, I can't even picture what it is like to be a head of a school almost anywhere. It's a tough job. But it's nice to hear about the apparatus that's been set up for support of these school leaders.
Yeah, wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall in one of those meetings?
Yes.
Fabulous. So much rich, rich experience. Another fantastic leader we spoke to was Cam Choan of ECIS. And what a go-getter, this lady. She's really worked hard at bringing all kinds of new ideas to ECIS. And similar to Pauline O'Brien, and this is episode 50 I'm referring to, Cam came to ECIS from the business world and took a hard look at some of the practices and said, hey, wait a minute, let's change some of these things. ECIS started off just as the European Council of International Schools, but now they have expanded to schools around the world. Their professional learning opportunities and outreach has grown tenfold in the past 4 years under CAM's direction. Inclusion is really important to Cam. As a person of color, she has worked with thought partners to support learning and to improve DEI practices. And the mission of ECIS is to make the world a better place while preparing tomorrow's leaders to do the same. And isn't that an amazing mission? ECIS has middle leader training opportunities. As I said, DEI is a key program as well as child protection. And ECIS also aims to approach recruiting with new eyes, questioning previous practices. I'm wondering if Cam and Pauline have talked to each other by looking at some of these practices, but including bringing in more diversity of hires and including local educators, which really makes a lot of sense because there is now a dearth of teachers in the international education world. And one thing I really enjoyed about talking with Cam is the extent to which she and ECIS, as an extension of her ideas, seek to bring in student voices. And they've really done a great job with that.
That episode and the one with Michael, and we've had others with organizational leaders, really, I think for our people just coming in, maybe they're already overseas, it helps them understand how there is organization to all these international schools. I remember in my early years trying to explain international education, and they go, well, who's in charge? What department? All this stuff. And I tried to explain how they were independent schools in all these different cities around the world, but they do have organizational structure. And now more than ever, the heavy weights that some of these organizations carry that you've just described, several of them. And then you meet these personalities like Cam, who's just a force and driven to say, as you were saying, why are you doing it this way? Let's take a look at this. And just that opening to change and to self-reflect and to self-criticize, I think, for schools and organizations to say, we've got a big mission statement on that wall. Are we really doing it? So those were some of my takeaways.
Yeah, absolutely. It always blows my mind to see these thought leaders who look at something and see it from fresh eyes and have the courage to propose that there might be a different way of doing things because a lot of these international school communities are pretty entrenched. And,
Yep.
you always talked about Twadi, the way we've always done it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that does exist in general in the international school community. And for these outside people to come in and say, well, why? Wait a minute, can we do it a different way? And, let's really look at our mission and does our work support what we say we're intending to do? So this was another fantastic conversation. Talk about a thought leader and a visionary. Michael Nachbar of GOA came back again to talk with us about the future of education. And it was just so great to be in community with him and hearing some
Mm.
of the things that he has been looking at and GOA has been looking at. And in the past, GOA has adapted to changes like the COVID lockdown. They were kind of the forerunners, really. They almost just kind of had to keep on doing what they were doing. But what ended up happening was they were the ones that other schools looked to because they said, well, you guys have been doing this for a long time. How do you do it well? And so they were a great role model for, like David said, humanizing online education. He also talked about the growth of the for profit international school sector, the ever growing number of international schools and how that has affected GOA and how it operates. He also talked about some schools who are preparing for the possibility of closure and whether due to a worldwide or local event and the extent to which that affects schools and how they operate. The future, which involves hybrid and full time virtual learning and how that might look. He talked about the process of getting buy in from stakeholders for hybrid and full time virtual learning. And he talked about online learning, saying, really, that's just the medium. And it's really important to remember that it's all about learning. It's not all about the fact that we're online. And we really want to make sure that we're looking at the best practices. And that's what GOA does so well. They are also looking at how to harness AI. And one thing I really appreciated that they did was they went straight to the students and talked about, okay, so how are you using AI? How could you use AI? Could you use it as much as possible for the next while and then get back to us on what it was like? And they also, of course, talked to teachers and partner schools to really get as full a picture as they can about how best to use it. Michael reflected on his GOA Insights blog post, 7 Prediction for Education in 2024. And he said he's going to stop putting dates on these things because, he knows these things are coming, but you always have to keep in mind the pace that things change in education or don't change. We talked about some future proofing strategies that schools can incorporate to really be less reactive and more proactive in terms of the future of education, and then some guiding principles that can steer this future proofing. And of course, we looked at specifically at GOA as a case study at how it's working to future proof its program offerings. Fantastic interview.
Yes. And my takeaway is I wish I'd known this guy many, many years ago because he's the kind of visionary, as you're saying, who I would love to have worked with to be a partner. So that was really rewarding. And what I will say for folks is I would bookmark the GOA Insights blog because they write blog posts from time to time. And I just find them real eye opening and thoughtful, and they get you thinking about possibilities. And boy, GOA is about possibilities. And that's pretty awesome. All right. So let's move on to international families. Audrey, I'm just thinking all these themes. It's really pretty cool that we covered so many different topic areas because we have our main categories as a part of our mission. And it's really heartwarming sitting here in frigid Boise going, yeah, we're bringing some very helpful information with a lot of different areas for folks to learn about. So I'm feeling pretty good, feeling a lot of gratitude.
I'm glad at least your heart is warm.
So, international families, and I just wonder how many people really stop and think about this one. And we're going to come at it from 2 very different angles. One is episode 60 with Caroline Makepeace, a wonderful Australian who's made the Research Triangle of North Carolina her home with her husband and daughters, and she runs the Why Travel blog. So this one comes under travel, which is kind of a sub topic for us. And we're never going to take that on as a big topic because there's just thousands of resources out there. So we bring travel in when it deals with one of our other themes. In this case, just being an international family. Carolyn went through this topic of what does it mean to travel with children. And so there was the whole travel part, all these wonderful tips on planning and getting your children's involvement in the planning and helping be as safe as you can, but on the other hand, also giving children real educational opportunities. The other part of it was what's it like to live in a foreign country, like all you international educators, and have people come visit you. And how do you plan for that? How do you host friends? How do you host families? So she really brought some great insight into that one. And I would definitely check out her Why Travel blog. It's all about travel, maybe not all the nuts and bolts and getting the best prices and all that. I'm sure she covers some of it, but it's more broad how to be a traveler, maybe a little less a tourist, although it's okay to be a tourist for part of your traveling. So it's a very rewarding and helpful site, the Why Travel blog.
One thing that Caroline suggested that I really appreciated was get your kids involved in the planning, get them involved in the decision making, And she also was very adept at having her kids have some kind of a theme that they were working on, or some kind of, you might call it homeschooling opportunity that her kids would be working on while they were traveling. And it just kept them involved and interested, and so appreciated her tips and insights.
That's a great point in the sense that they did homeschool. They lived in multiple places. So for me as a nomad, it's me in a suitcase, them as nomads. That was a lot more going on. So if folks were even contemplating that, it's something to look into at their blog, she and her husband's blog. Episode 51 was with Claire Gall, friend of the website and the podcast, and Jamel Bouzina. I looked that one up, Jamel, just to make sure. And that episode was a family approach to recruiting. So, same theme, children working as a family. And it was getting into the unpacking the question of what does it mean to recruit with children? So Claire and Jamel offered their firsthand experiences searching for jobs in schools that work for all family members. And this fall, they recruited once again and landed terrific positions for them and a great place for their children. Their kids, I think they're preteens now, are old enough to offer some ideas to the process, but it was also looking through the lens of will that next school and community be able to support our children?
One thing that Claire and Jamel also helped me to think about, this wasn't something that I had to take into consideration particularly, was can the school accommodate your kids if they have special needs? And that was a really helpful insight to have. And I think we have that in our profiling schools doc.
Yes.
But that's something for sure that I think parents certainly need to factor in when they're looking at schools. You might get all excited about, I really want to go to this place. Let's say Paris, everyone always quotes Paris. Does that school have a program for your kids? Who knows until you research it. So I appreciated their insights. So we're going to move on now to some smaller topics, sort of one-off topics. And the first one is professional learning. And we talked to Justin Hardman of 21st Century Learning, and I felt so starstruck talking to him. David knew him back in the day when he was a high school student, but in episode 65, we connected with Justin and talked about learning pathways that 21st Century Learning provides for international educators. We talked about ways that educators can become PD providers. And we talked about a menu of professional learning offerings that is available online. We talked about, again, the role of generative AI in professional development, and some thoughts on how school leaders can design and implement professional learning opportunities for their communities that dovetail with their mission and vision and values of their community, while connecting to student learning as they work to gather data on their implementation so they can see what the effect of their professional development programs are.
So we almost could have put this one under leadership just because Justin is such a leader in the field of professional development. And if you didn't listen to that episode, you might be thinking, well, if you know Justin, his background's technology. Yet that isn't what he's about. He's about person to person contact. And the 21st Century Learning Company really is about bringing people together to learn together. They do offer some virtual programming as well. And I think it's a very helpful episode for people that really haven't been connected so much with professional learning at their international schools, or newbies to just know what some options are. And as Audrey was saying earlier, these regional organizations offer lots of professional development learning, and schools bring in professional development speakers and coaches and things like that. So that's one of the biggest pluses. I think after a while, we just got so used to it. But having professional learning opportunities is such a big part of being an international educator, right?
Absolutely.
So, episode 56 was another one that Audrey and I were super excited about. We're always excited about our shows,
We are.
and we are. And we're both coaches and activity people, and we really see so much learning taking place with that. So we were very fortunate to connect with Nick DeForest, who's written a book. He's got a website. He's got a podcast all about co-curricular programming, athletic coaching. And this is another great show for people just wondering, okay, I got my job. What's it going to be like? I want to run an activity. I want to coach, whatever it might be. So Nick offers so many tips, and it's the whole child approach to supporting students really after the bell rings. And what are the opportunities, and how do you get students involved in choosing what activities that might be? A lot of schools, you don't have to wait. They're going to be knocking on your door. Mr. Carpenter, could you help us do this club, whatever it might be? So like I just said, Nick has a website. He's got a partner who works with him on the podcast. He's written a book. It's sitting right over on my bedstand right now. I've started reading it. So definitely go into our information hub to find the links to Nick's publications for sure. So as a big time coach, Audrey, what were some of your takeaways?
Well, I was going to say that once again, the theme of belonging came along with this
Yes.
podcast, and Nick really talked about how much having these after school programs supports kids new to schools find their people, and kids can come up with an idea for a co-curricular program, and they ask, like you said, they knock on the door and they say, can you help us set up a robotics club or what have you, so they can pursue some of their passions. And it really opens things up. And also, as a teacher, when you coach, you get to know kids in a whole different way. I know as the PE teacher, that's sort of like being a coach. And I would go to the meeting about a particular student, and people would talk about how many challenges they have with that student in class. And I'd say, oh, she's a dream in my class because she loves PE. She
So
likes to
true.
be active
Yep.
and moving, and they're a whole different person. And I've always felt honored to be able to represent a different side of that person and help people to see that maybe there was a way they could reach them through looking at their passions and interests that are outside of the classroom. So that was always a joy for me. Not to mention the trips. The trips were pretty cool too, I gotta say. Last but not least, show 61 was the two of us reminding the audience about our huge library of resources that's available on our website. And I'm not going to rehash all of them, but we shared some fabulous resources about ALOC, Global Online Academy. Doug Oda's work in Safe Passages talk about belonging and transitions and all that's involved with that. The International School Community blog, Wall Street Journal, David had an article he was sharing there, and The Economist, and they were looking at how teachers are burning out. And, we just want to reiterate again that if you have a passion for teaching, if teaching is your calling, but you're starting to kind of burn out, and you're particularly in the US, and I'll say Canada as well, and maybe some other home countries that we're not as familiar with, and you're kind of burning out on teaching because of all the difficulties, consider international education because it's a whole different ballgame. Typically, teachers have more respect, make better pay, you get the travel in to boot, you have often have a higher caliber of student, and you get all these rich interactions and all the PD. I mean, I could go on and on about all the benefits, but that's something that we really, really want to stress as part of our mission here.
Yes, that really does get at our mission. And I think just our last episode with Max, where 2 months into it, just described just what you said. And he had been overseas as an international kid. He didn't know what it was like to be a teacher per se, but just so many advantages. But we always temper that with there could be places and schools that might not work well for you, that might not be set up for a successful experience. And that is another topic we want to try to delve into at some point because there's a whole spectrum of schools out there. That's for sure. All right, Audrey, let's kind of bring things to a close here. And one of the things I wanted to share is that when we finish each of our interviews, we're texting each other and saying things like, wow, what a guest. I learned so much. What a life they are living. And I would say this, boy, howdy. That interview was jam packed with so much helpful information. So hopefully you as listeners, you're having similar responses as we feel so fortunate to share such incredible educators, leaders, human beings with you. And speaking of special people, I continue to be so thankful to you, Audrey, that we get to work together to not only publish the podcast, but to continue our efforts to add to our Information Hub blog, our library, our going global stories, And folks, if you have a topic idea, potential guests for us, please email us at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com.
I echo what you said, David. It is such a pleasure to work with you. Just so everybody knows, David is the researcher, the writer. I am more of the editor, and I so appreciate our partnership. And we always seem to be on the same page, and we keep each other steady and going, and really complement each other so beautifully. So, partner, you're the best, and let's keep it going for another season, buddy.
You got it. Thanks to you, Audrey, and our listeners. Keep spreading the word.
Yeah, thanks. Take care.
Thank you for joining us today on Educators Going Global.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and all the other usual suspects.
Please subscribe, like us, and leave a review on Apple and Spotify, and let your teaching friends know about us so we can grow our community.
Please reach out at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com and join our Facebook group, Educators Going Global, if you have ideas, comments, or wish to share a Going Global story of your own.
You can also find us on Instagram at Educators Going Global.
Please visit our website as well, www.educatorsgoingglobal.com. All our podcast episodes are on there by topic, along with blog posts, Going Global stories, and our ever-growing resource library. For now, this is Audrey
And David.
inviting you to travel,
Teach.
and connect with us.